March the 8th, 1862, and the Texas Brigade is on the move. They were leaving their winter quarters behind and headed for Fredericksburg. To make the Union forces on the other side of the Potomac believe they were still in camp, they left most of their cabins and tents and much of their cooking supplies behind. The Texans marched 25 miles south through the cold and mud to cross the Rappahannock River at Falmouth and set up camp in the hills just west of Fredericksburg. The brigade is now under the command of newly promoted Brigadier General John Bell Hood, after the resignation of Louis Wigfall to join the Confederate Senate. In the early spring of 1862, Union forces had achieved significant victories in the West at Fort Henry on the Tennessee River and at Fort Donelson on the Cumberland. And they'd occupied Nashville, the first Confederate state capital to fall. But back in the East, Lincoln was still reeling from the disastrous loss at Manassas the previous year and was impatient with General George McClellan, often called Little Napoleon or Little Mac, for not making an attack on the Confederate capital at Richmond. With Confederate General Joe Johnston's 45,000-man army controlling Manassas, McClellan proposed a plan to outflank Johnston and cross the Rappahannock at Urbana, Virginia, and strike Richmond, but the plan soon fell apart when Johnston abandoned the defense of Manassas and moved back to Fredericksburg on March the 6th. Instead, McClellan decided to attack Richmond up the Virginia Peninsula from a Union stronghold at Fort Monroe, where the Union Navy controlled the Hampton Roads and could provide support. During the month of March, Fort Monroe and Camp Butler on the Newport News Point received 121,500 troops, 44 artillery batteries, and 102 siege guns, and enough supplies to support a huge army. The peninsula was defended by Major General John Bankhead Magruder, with a force of some 16,000 Confederates. Magruder had built 3 defensive lines to oppose just such an attack up the peninsula, including one along the Warwick River to Yorktown and one defending Williamsburg. The Confederate ironclad CSS Virginia was still lurking in the area after the naval battle with the USS Monitor at Hampton Roads. So McClellan scrapped the plan for an amphibious landing at Yorktown and ordered an advance up the peninsula to begin on April 4th. By April the 5th, Union forces had reached Magruder's Yorktown-Warwick River line. But due to McClellan's vast overestimation of Magruder's force, he decided to lay siege to Yorktown instead of attacking it. Over the next month, McClellan built entrenchments and brought up his heavy guns from Fort Monroe. That delay gave Magruder time to bring up reinforcements, which included the Texas Brigade. On April the 7th, the brigade left for Milford Station to board trains for Richmond, where they arrived on April the 10th. After several days' rest, the brigade began their 85-mile march to Yorktown. By April the 19th, they were in their new camps just a few miles east of Yorktown. Hood's Texas Brigade, which could only field 1,922 effectives, was assigned to William Whiting's 1st Division as part of Major General Gustavus Smith's reserve. The brigade at full strength should have been 4,000 men, but pneumonia, measles, typhoid fever, and dysentery had gutted the ranks during the winter. Susanna Urell tells a story in her book, Hood's Texas Brigade, that while in Yorktown, the enlisted men decided to present a gift to Hood to show their respect. They purchased a horse and presented it to him, saying, "In you, sir, we found a soldier and a gentleman. In you, sir, we found a leader we are proud to follow." On May the 3rd, 1862, Magruder ordered an evacuation of Yorktown, and the 4 divisions that would become the Army of Northern Virginia began a strategic retirement, with Longstreet and Magruder moving on the James side of the peninsula towards Williamsburg, and Gustavus Smith and D.H. Hill moving up the York River side. William Whiting's division, which included the Texans, moved with Smith and the supply trains. Torrential rains had caused the roads to become a muddy quagmire that had delayed the Union advance, but had also caused the Confederate supply trains to move at a glacial pace. On May the 4th, General William B. Franklin's 11,000-man Union division, which McClellan had requested back in April, boarded steamers at Yorktown to move up the York River towards West Point. The plan was for Franklin to land at Eltham's Landing and to cut off Joe Johnston's retreating Confederates. Joe Johnston gave the job of stopping Franklin to General William Whiting, who in turn gave it to John Bell Hood with Wade Hampton's brigade of South Carolinians. Johnston told Hood to feel the enemy out gently and fall back, avoiding an engagement and drawing them from the protection of their gunboats. Hood would soon know whether his Texans could fight or not.
Eltham's Landing was the first battle that Hood's brigade fought, and it was called less of a battle but more than a skirmish. But it was fought on May 7th, 1862. It was part of McClellan's Peninsula campaign. And George McClellan boasted that he could take Richmond within 90 days. And so, he wanted to prove that to be correct, but it didn't exactly work that way. Hood's brigade was assigned to guard the supply trains of the Army of Northern Virginia under Joseph Johnston. And so on May 7th, it was the first encounter with a sizable Union force.
On May the 5th and 6th, Union forces disembarked their steamers under the protection of their gunboats and formed battle lines that extended from the Pamunkey River to the south bank of the York River. The morning of May the 7th broke clear and cheerfully, according to Private Robert C. Campbell of the 5th Texas. The heavy rain from the night before it ended, but that cheerful morning would soon be upended. The Texas Brigade had positioned themselves, and at 9 a.m., they moved out towards the Federals, with the 4th Texas and Hood taking the lead.
And on the march before the battle, John Bell Hood is leading his troops down a road. And there was Union pickets or skirmishers, and they were hiding up in a tree. And so one of the Federal soldiers had John Bell Hood in his sights. And he jumped out of the tree, and he was aiming his rifle towards John Bell Hood. And if the soldier would have been successful, that would have been the end of John Bell Hood. Well, the thing was, though, also that General Hood told his soldiers, do not load your guns. We're going to wait till we get into the Confederate lines to load the guns. And so nobody had their guns loaded except for one soldier, Private John Deal of the 4th Texas. And so when the soldier jumped down, the Federal soldier jumped down, Private Deal took his rifle right away and shot him and saved General Hood's life.
Hood dismounted and ordered the 4th to load and advance on the Federals, with the 1st Texas on their left and the 5th Texas and Hampton's Legion on their right. The 1st Texas, led by newly promoted A.T. Rainey, was fired upon by Union troops. Rainey ordered his men back into the woods and to fall on your knees, unfurl the Lone Star flag, and give them hell. The Union attack was stopped, and after 20 or 30 minutes, Rainey ordered a charge. And with a wild rebel yell, the 1st Texas jumped to their feet and drove the enemy back.
Eltham's Landing really also proved the worth of Hood's Texas Brigade. After the battle, General Gustavus Smith said if he had more soldiers of Hood's Texas Brigade, they could win the war within 3 months. And that was always notable because it was the first battle that Hood's Brigade really fought in, and they were trying to find themselves whether or not they could be brave enough in battle, and they were very brave in battle. And John Bell Hood was very aggressive with his troops. And so after the battle, Joseph Johnston said, well, General Hood, what would you do if you would have driven them all the way back to the river and they would have gotten on the gunboats? And John Bell Hood, half humorously and half serious, said, well, the soldiers would have swam the river and jumped on the gunboats and captured the gunboats, because the gunboats that were on the Pamunkey River saved the Union forces. And because what happened was Hood's brigade was driving the Federal forces so back so effectively that the Federal forces didn't have anywhere to go because they were going to be driven into the river. Well, the cannons on the Union gunboats kept the regiments from really pursuing the Federal soldiers back to the gunboats. But it also proved General Hood's worth as a fighting general as well. He really did cement the reputation of Hood's Texas Brigade after the Battle of Eltham's Landing.
Today, the Eltham's Landing battlefield is located all on private property, but several Virginia Civil War trails markers, like this one, about a mile from the town of Eltham, and another about 3/4 of a mile down the road, mark the location of the battle. Brickhouse Point is about a mile in that direction, and Hood's troops fought about a mile behind me. If you'd like to get more information about the battle, check out Joe Owen's book, A Fine Introduction to Battle. There's a link in the description to where you can get a copy. I hope you enjoyed episode 3, First Contact. And if you did, don't forget to give us a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel.